Welcome to GetMoving TV. I'm Dr. Chris Landon and I serve as your host. I've been here in Ventura County for some 25 years, serving the parents and patients and professionals of Ventura County. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of professionals side by side in different clinics through the counties who've expanded services. One of them is here with me today, Dr. Nancy Merrick, author now.
Thank you.
And tell us about your new book.
I have a book coming out in June called Among Chimpanzees. Thank you very much. And I'm really excited about it. It's a book that tells about what it was like to work with Jane Goodall years ago and about what's happening today for chimpanzees in Africa and also in captivity. I hope it'll be a really inspiring, interesting book for people.
Well, as you know, I worked down in Riverside with stump-tailed macaques, and we're doing the social deprivation. And then towards the end, it was becoming very obvious to me that it was just wrong. We were doing that having them in a colony and studying them told us more about ourselves, but some of the things we were doing in terms of social deprivation just weren't right. And so I went into pediatrics because, of course, the children have smaller teeth than my stump-tailed macaque. So how did you start out in primatology?
In primatology. When I was in college, they had a program and they would actually pay your way and give you college credit to go work with Jane Goodall in Africa. She was my hero. I couldn't imagine that I was getting the opportunity. So when I was 19, I actually went and lived in Tanzania for 7 months. And then I got to study chimps for about 3 years after that. I wouldn't be a doctor today if it weren't for the fact that some friends of mine were kidnapped from Jane's camp shortly after I came back to the United States. And they were kidnapped. One of them was held for 100 days, but eventually all of them were released safely. But all of a sudden I had to think about a new career choice. So I became a doctor. I think that was a good choice. I really like being at Magnolia Clinic in North Oxnard, one of the county satellite clinics, and it gives me extra time to be able to still dabble in the work of conservation of chimps in Africa.
Well, what's that particular area like now? I mean, already, with people kidnapped from the camp, we definitely have that intersection between humans and chimps. It's just, we're in their territory. So how did that roll out? What's happening in that area now? Is Tanzania being encroached on as well?
Oh, yes, it is. But, before we go there, I'd like to tell you a little bit about chimps themselves, if that would be all right. I really want people to know how interesting chimps are before we start talking about some of the more sobering aspects of life for chimps today. Chimps, by many, are believed to be one of our closest relatives. And it is absolutely stunning when you go to study chimps that you have to rethink what it is to be human in a way, because they share so many of our mannerisms, they have cultures, they have deep friendships and deep family ties, they feel emotions in much the way that we do. They use tools every day. It's kind of astounding. You really can't understand what I'm saying, though, unless you see a video, and I did bring a video to share that I think, it's just 2 minutes, and I think it really will give people a better feel for the truth of what I'm saying about how interesting they are. They're almost like caricatures of human beings. The video I'd like to show is of 3 chimps at a sanctuary in Florida. And the 2 adults were in experimental labs. They were experimented on for years. And finally, they've been retired to this beautiful sanctuary when a little baby chimp arrives at the sanctuary. This video will give you an idea of how compassionate the chimps can be, in that these 2 become the foster parents to this little chimp.
All right, we'll roll video.
Melody was born at Save the Chimps on July 12, 2007. Her mother was not interested in raising her, so the caregivers at Save the Chimps stepped in. When Mel was a year old, she was introduced to Ron and April in hopes that they would be her adoptive parents. Great Big Ron and little Mel got along right away, and April was only too happy to carry Mel around in proper chimpanzee style. The 3 of them made a happy little family. They can often be seen playing together on their favorite climbing structure. April loves blankets and rarely leaves the building without at least one to take with her to the island. This seemed like a good idea to Mel, so she started the same thing. Then, Mel found another use for the blankets: transportation. They didn't quite see eye to eye, but eventually April gave in. At first, they weren't very good at it. But over time, they mastered their new technique. If you would like to help Ron and April care for Melody, you can become an adoptive parent too. Visit our website at www.savethechimps.org for adoption details.
Well, that was the amount of compassion and human-like, or chimp-like, I guess it's more, if we're chimp-like, then they're human-like, for heaven's sakes. What other kinds of things did you see when you were with Jane Goodall that really gave you that experience, that you wrote this book, Among Chimpanzees, because you were among them?
You get so attached to them. You know them as individuals, personalities. It's, almost like watching a soap opera. So you do become very attached. It was interesting to go back in 2008 with my family. I wanted them to see why I really care about chimps so much. And so we went back to Jane's camp. While we were there, we saw some of the children and grandchildren of the chimps that I had known so many years ago. And it was surprising how attached I felt to them, almost like responsible in a way. We learned during that trip that chimps are now extinct in 4 countries of Africa. I was really surprised at that. And they are almost extinct in 10 other countries. In every one of the 21 countries that they still survive in, they're very endangered. And that's because there's a lot of population growth in Africa that puts a lot of pressure on the trees. In fact, I have a slide to share with you that gives you an idea of how much the habitat has changed since I was there many years ago. Actually, a little bit before I was there. This video takes us from 1960. Not video, but this slide takes us from 1960, when there was just one continuous swath of forest across all of Central Africa that was habitat for chimps. And there were probably about 1 to 2 million chimps at that time. But if you look at another slide for the situation in 2010, you can see it has dramatically changed, and that's because forests have been cut down because people need them there.
Well, that's the intersection too. Is the incredible poverty that's there, and the subsistence that trying to find land to plant and value the trees or whatever, compared to our forebears, the chimpanzee. So what are the interactions like now? I mean, as that forest retracts, do they end up in the villages, and what happens there? Are they stealing food? And
That's an excellent question. We went back last September, and we actually went out into an area like you are guessing about in western Uganda. It's an area that's home to about 300 chimps that are living on lands that fall outside of national parks or protected areas. We went out with a USC grad student. Her name is Maureen McCarthy. It was her last day in the field, and she took us out, and we met this group of 20 chimps that have been studied since 2007. And in that period of time, this group of chimps has gone from a group of 30 to 35 individuals. They're now down to just 20. The reason is that over that period of time, every single tree in their forest has been cleared. There's just really an occasional tree, which means that maybe there's only one tree with fruit, which is what their diet consists of, that's available at any given time. That's pretty devastating for these very intelligent animals, and so they have to be really resilient and clever to figure out how to survive. You probably can guess that one of the ways that they continue to survive is then by stealing from the farmers. These are very poor subsistence farmers who are barely getting enough food grown to feed their own families, let alone having some of it stolen by chimps. It makes for a pretty ugly situation. I have a great photo of two of these chimps in this area that are crossing the road. Their names are Kita and Murray, and they are two of just 3 males left in this group. Usually a chimp community will be about 40 to 100 individuals, so 20 is pretty small. There's just 3 grown-up males, and they, because of all the pressure on this group constantly from the human beings around them, there's usually, when they cross the road, 1 male at the front of the group and maybe 2 others at the back of the group to provide protection to the 6 females and the infants and the youngsters. It's really switching everything up, and it's a really tough situation.
So compared to that 1.5 to 2 million chimps before, how many are we looking at now?
There's 150, somewhere between 150 and 300,000 chimps left. Thankfully, probably about 100,000 of them are in remote forests where people haven't built roads in and started putting pressure on the chimps. But that's beginning to happen. Even deep in the Congo basins, we're seeing changes like that developing. So that's kind of why these chimps are so interesting that we met. Those 20 chimps they represent thousands of others that currently are in the very same situation. And really, that's the future of all the rest of the chimps, unless we really start doing something to help out, supporting the groups that are trying to make change, trying to make it profitable for farmers to maintain trees on their property.
So I guess then that comes to how much. So what is this going to cost to help
cost?
all that out?
Well, it could cost quite a bit. I think you have to, there's
Plant
a lot of people
trees
proposing ways to make it profitable for everyone. And trees are going to be important even to us here in the United States. The Congo Basin forests influence our weather patterns here.
Mm-hmm. So let's get back to your book. Tell us about what goes on in your book. As you're among chimps, what kind of observations are in the book that our readers are all going to jump on Amazon on June 7th? And
It's really interesting to work with Jane Goodall, and people are always interested what it was like to be there when she was just making her first discoveries. It used to be, it's hard to believe today, but it used to be that we thought man was the only intelligent creature on Earth. How wrong we were. And Jane was really the first to make everyone aware of the fact that we are definitely not, that there are other animals like elephants, gorillas, so many intelligent animals that have pretty interesting societies. So it really gets into that wonderful time when everyone would sit around their TV sets waiting for the next update, the latest videos from Jane Goodall, that were revealing this whole new side of things and making us really rethink what it is to be a human being. So it talks about that. It talks about some really fun stories of what it's like to work with chimps and some of the amazing things that they do. One of my favorite stories from Jane Goodall's camp was the chimps love to steal clothes from the clothes baskets. And there was one named Hugo who one day stole one of our researchers' red underwear. Took off into the forest with the red underwear. When Franz ran after him trying to get his red underwear, Hugo, the chimp, put the underwear on his head like a hat so that he could use his hands to pick up some rocks and start pelting the researcher with the rocks, standing up on his hind legs with red underwear. It's just crazy, all the different things that they do, the novel ideas that they come up with, their ability to mimic human beings. Is pretty fun. It tells the stories of those people that were kidnapped, of what it's like to go through life as a friend with Jane Goodall. And your hero, boy, I'm the luckiest person in the world to still be working with her and involved in what she's doing. And I hope it tells a lot about what we can do. There are easy things we can do to reverse the situation of Africa's forests and improve the future for our kids to inherit a planet that still has all those animals that we love, the elephants, the polar bears, the tigers, chimps and gorillas. You know the list.
And your children, how do you think they're going to follow you?
My children are very interested in this. I think that's safe to say. My daughter and my husband and I have created a website called chimpsaver.org. That's been a really fun thing to work together on. And it connects people who are interested in learning about chimps to ways and organizations that are making a difference. It tries to simplify for people that are interested in chimps how they can do something meaningful, like sign a petition or go volunteer in Africa.
And then do you have a photographer? Because capturing all that is not the easiest thing in the world.
Absolutely. We have worked with a photographer who spent a year there, who goes up in the canopy and does wonderful work photographing for nature on PBS and all kinds of, he's really wonderful and his images are stunning, and one of them is on the cover of the book, I'm happy to say. We also are working closely with 3 different field researchers, and they are blogging on the website. That's really interesting. So you can meet every one of those 20 chimps up close and personal and get to know their names and their families and their characteristics and hear directly from the field what's happening. And pretty soon we're going to be starting in talking about what we can do to help these chimps.
So we're going to get back to you again. So you made this big leap from primatologist to medical school. How was that path, especially a woman in medical school? I think there's more women in medical school than there are men nowadays, but at the time, how was that path for you to make that leap from primatologist over to medicine?
Well, it was, medical school was very different back in the 1970s, the second half of the 1970s. There were not that many women, even at that time. It's changed dramatically for the better now. It's terrific. I think there's actually even more women than men medical students these days, which is great. It was fine. It was fine because it's lent itself to being able to be on both the human side and the chimp side. I'm dying to go back to Africa and to live there again for a couple of years and to be able to be both a physician and somebody interested in great apes and forests.
I don't know if this is the first time Stanley Patterson, your boss, has heard that you're leaving to go to Africa. But, so how would you go about making that happen? We have an organization here, Ventura Global Health, and we do take the residents and fund them to go off to foreign countries, because we don't want it to just be people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s. I want them to, their whole lives, to understand that there is an entire world. We have a group down in Honduras now, and they're meeting with the hospital. We're setting up a family medicine residency. We're meeting with the Institute of Violence also, because if you want to know violence, you go to the Honduras, where the #1 and #2 murder capital are. But how are you going to finance your trip there? And how do you go about? Does the Jane Goodall have a place that you stay?
There are so many opportunities in countries of East Africa. That's the part of Africa that I'm most familiar with. They are hungry for physicians, so it's not hard to find a really good situation to work in. And there's a couple of really fine hospitals in Uganda, near where all this is happening. There's an island sanctuary in the middle of Lake Victoria that is home to 50 chimps, and the nearby islands have so many medical needs. I'm very interested in setting up a clinic on one of those islands, and it's a perfect opportunity for somebody like me. But I am also very interested in helping get some of our residents at the local county hospital involved with a couple of very fine hospitals in western Uganda, western Uganda, near where the mountain gorillas can be found.
So we were talking about chimpanzees. So the mountain gorillas are in the mountains, obviously. So, yeah, so how is their habitat? Is that being invaded as well then?
Absolutely. These days you only find mountain gorillas, only about 800 of them in the world, in very high altitudes, because all their habitat has been destroyed at lower elevations. So they tend to survive in areas where people can't cultivate fields.
We have so many haunting pictures of them through telephoto lenses, and obviously they're, whatever capacity it is that's in there, I won't call it humanness because it's not. It's a gorilla-ness that's much more important to us in terms of a society. How are their societies put together? You were describing 2 or 3 males for every 10 to 20 girls. Sounds like a California summer.
In usual chimp communities, there'll be pretty even numbers of males and females. For gorillas, they usually will have one silverback and maybe another blackback gorilla and many females. And then there's a few males that just are surviving apart from those groups.
The adolescents on the side, I've seen them come up and try and do their thing with the silverback there and run
They're
away.
Amazing to see, and you can go and visit them and help the countries where these animals are found, because the ecotourism is really a huge help to conservation and to the local people.
Well, let me just get back to the doctor part again. So are there problems that are unique to that area? And when I go to Mexico, we have a lot of kidney disease because of dehydration while working in the fields. And when we have people come up here, we face the same kinds of problems. We've got a problem with diabetes throughout the world. And we have one where the test for diabetes is urinate in a cup, put it at the base of the coconut tree, and if there's acid in the morning, then you have type 2 diabetes. So is there a contrast in care there? What you see yourself with a bigger hospital, but how do you provide service to the humans there?
In East Africa, there are 3 kinds of patients that get hospitalized. They have malaria, or they have malaria, or they have malaria. Malaria is just a devastating problem. Of course, there are other problems like dengue fever. Typhoid has been a huge problem lately. Tuberculosis is something you see in the villages, but malaria is really the most devastating. And of course, HIV/AIDS is a huge problem. In Uganda, where we've spent so much time, the United States has actually been a major player in improving the health of people there, because they have been funding AIDS medications, which of course keeps people alive. And so the United States is extremely well regarded there.
Yeah, we work with Direct Relief, which is up in Santa Barbara, and help bring medications to really throughout the world. And the big donors, as it turns out, oftentimes are the manufacturers of the HIV drugs. We were asked to go to Nigeria once, and it was more that there were going to be more white people than black people in Nigeria by, I forget, they were guessing 2032, and it wasn't because more white people were moving in, it was the devastation that HIV has, and they needed people to work in the oil field, so suddenly America was a lot more interested. How else can we lure? So we talked about planting trees. What are the kind of microeconomic things? Making small loans to farmers? Are there businesses they can start up?
Small loans are would be a huge improvement, because a lot of times trees get cut in order to meet immediate needs, like being able to pay so that your child can continue their education and hopefully get through high school and on to college. So that there are programs that we are looking at in the immediate future. There's been all kinds of approaches to it. Increasingly, we're using satellite imaging to be able to monitor critical forests, and then providing that information to people on the ground who can then go document what's going on and give that information to authorities who can make a difference. We need to have a lot more pressure, too, for countries to enforce their existing laws that protect critical habitats and animals.
Well, Ventura, it's time for you to get moving. You need to help chimp savers. We need to walk among the chimps with Dr. Nancy Merrick.
Her name is Wunda, that it means close to die.
Wunda.
Wunda. And actually, her name is fit exactly with her, because she was in different situations that was very close to die. The last time she had a very serious illness. She was really bad. She lost weight, and she was, look how she becomes.
This is unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And now we are going to give her paradise
On the island.
on the island.
Yeah.